Two babies shivered in the cruel snow as death stalked them. But a wild horse emerged from the shadows, defying all instinct to protect them. A true story that proves miracles exist and that love knows no species. If you believe in angels, like and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories. The biting January wind howled through the snow-covered pine trees, carrying a sound that didn't belong to that wild landscape. It was a weak cry, almost imperceptible, struggling to exist against the fury of winter in the Sierra Nevada mountains. On that starless night, when the temperature plummeted to deadly numbers, two tiny bodies wrapped in torn blankets lay on the pristine snow, abandoned on the border between life and death. The twins, a boy and a girl not even a day old, faced the first and possibly last battle of their existence alone. The cold penetrated through the insufficient rags like 1,000 invisible needles, stealing the vital warmth from those little bodies that had barely known the world. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat an act of resistance against the icy embrace of death that was approaching. The nature reserve in that region held ancient secrets about impossible connections between creatures that should never meet. The local tribal elders told stories about protective spirits that took animal forms, but no one truly believed those legends until that night. That's when the deadly silence was broken by a powerful neigh that echoed through the slopes like a solitary thunderclap. From the shadows emerged a majestic figure, a Mustang black as the moonless night, with a perfect star-shaped white mark adorning its forehead. Local inhabitants knew him as Spirit, a wild stallion who for 7 years had avoided any human contact, becoming a living legend among the cowboys and forest rangers of the region. The animal stopped a few feet from the babies. Its nostrils flared, catching the scent of imminent danger. Its dark eyes, usually wild and distrustful, seemed to understand something that transcended the basic instinct of survival. For long minutes, the horse remained motionless, as if fighting an internal battle between its wild nature and something deeper, older than time itself. The powerful muscles trembled under the black coat, not from cold, but from a decision that defied millions of years of evolution. Then, in a movement that went against all natural logic, Spirit slowly approached the small white bundles that stood out against the dark snow of the night. The horse lowered its head, delicately sniffing the babies as if recognizing something sacred in them. Its soft lips touched their icy little faces in a caress impossible to describe. It was as if nature itself had chosen that moment to rewrite its immutable rules. With infinite care, the animal knelt in the snow, something wild horses rarely do voluntarily, and positioned its massive body beside the twins. The heat emanating from its flanks was like a private sun in that freezing darkness. Instinctively, or perhaps guided by ancestral wisdom, Spirit adjusted its position to create a barrier against the biting wind, transforming itself into a living fortress of muscle and fur. The hours dragged on like centuries in that silent vigil. The horse remained absolutely motionless, except for the deep breaths that created clouds of steam in the frigid air. Occasionally, when one of the babies stirred or whimpered, he would lower his head and blow warm air over them, as if he knew exactly what to do. The snow continued to fall, covering the animal's back with a white mantle, but he did not move. It was as if time had stopped in that small circle of heat and life in the midst of the winter desolation. Coyotes howled in the distance, but no predator dared to approach that surreal scene where the laws of nature had been temporarily suspended. When the first golden rays of the sun began to paint the snowy peaks, Maria Smith adjusted her utility belt over her forest ranger uniform. At 35, she knew every trail, every rock, every tree in that reserve, as if they were extensions of her own body. But that morning, something weighed on her chest beyond the usual equipment. It had been 3 years since the accident that had stolen not only her ability to bear life, but also a part of her soul that she believed was lost forever. Morning patrols had become her refuge, the only time she could be alone with her memories and the pain that refused to diminish. The rising sun transformed the snowy landscape into a sea of shimmering diamonds when Maria spotted something that made her stop abruptly. At first she thought her eyes were deceiving her, that perhaps the morning light was creating illusions in the snow. But no, there it was, a black horse lying in the snow, motionless as a statue. Her heart pounded as she recognized the star-shaped mark. It was Spirit, the Mustang no human had been able to approach in years. But what was he doing there, so far from his usual territory? That's when she noticed the small white bundles protected by the animal's body. Her approach was cautious, each step calculated not to frighten the stallion. Maria knew the unpredictable temperament of wild Mustangs, especially one as notorious as Spirit. But the horse merely raised its head, looking at her with eyes that seemed to carry an urgent message. When she got close enough to see clearly, her legs almost gave out. Two babies, so small they could fit in the palm of her hands, were nestled against the horse's flank. Alive, breathing, an impossible miracle on that icy morning. The rescue was a delicate dance between trust and urgency. Spirit allowed Maria to approach, but his muscles remained tense, ready to protect his precious cargo if necessary. With trembling hands, she checked the baby's vital signs, surprised to find them relatively stable despite the brutal night they had faced. The horse watched every movement with intense attention, as if it perfectly understood what was happening. When Maria finally took the babies into her arms, wrapping them in her own coat, Spirit slowly stood up, shaking off the snow accumulated on his back. For an eternal moment, woman and horse stared at each other. There was something in the animal's eyes that transcended the barrier between species, a silent communication that spoke of trust, of purpose fulfilled, of something greater than either could comprehend. Then, with a soft neigh that sounded more like a sigh, Spirit turned and trotted back towards the forest, disappearing among the trees like a shadow at midday. Maria stood there, the babies warming against her chest, tears freezing on her face as she processed the impossible she had just witnessed. The small community of Aspen Creek exploded in activity when the news of the rescue spread. The makeshift medical center at the local health clinic became a hive of nurses and onlookers. The twins, miraculously, showed only mild signs of hypothermia, as if the horse's heat had been calculated with surgical precision to keep them alive without overheating. Them. Dr. Miller, the town doctor for 20 years, shook his head in disbelief as he examined the little ones. In all my career, I've never seen anything like it. They shouldn't be here. Maria remained by the baby's side throughout all the exams, an invisible connection already forming between them. When the nurse asked for names for the temporary registry, the words came out of her mouth before she could think. Lua and Sewell. The girl, pale as moonlight, and the boy with a golden birthmark on his forehead like a small rising sun. It was as if the names had always belonged to them, just waiting to be spoken. The medical team, touched by the story and Maria's obvious dedication, allowed her to remain as temporary caregiver, while the authorities began the investigation into the abandonment. The makeshift social services office in Aspen Creek rarely dealt with such complex cases. Sarah Jones, the assigned social worker, was an efficient 40-year-old woman who had seen a lot in her career. But nothing had prepared her for this. Standard procedures seemed inadequate given the extraordinary nature of the case. There were heated debates about temporary custody, about the police investigation, about 1,000 bureaucratic details that seemed to diminish in the face of the miracle that had occurred. But Maria fought with a determination that surprised even herself, presenting herself as temporary guardian, willing to face any scrutiny necessary. It was on the third morning after the rescue that the impossible happened again. Maria was on the porch of the small cabin provided by the Forest Service, cradling Lua, who was crying inconsolably, when a familiar neigh cut through the air. There, at the edge of the forest, less than 50 yards from the cabin, was Spirit. The wild horse watched intently, its posture alert but not threatening. The moment the sound reached the baby's ears, the crying stopped as if a switch had been flipped. The child's little eyes turned in the direction of the sound, and for the first time since the rescue, a hint of a smile appeared on her tiny face. From that day on, the appearances became routine. Whenever the twins were restless, especially during the dreaded night colic, the horse would appear like a protective shadow, His neigh had an almost magical effect on the children, calming them instantly. Maria began to document the phenomenon, recording videos and taking detailed notes. It was as if an invisible connection had been established that night in the snow, a bond that defied all logical explanation. Skeptics said it was coincidence, but those who witnessed it knew they were facing something extraordinary. David Johnson, the local veterinarian who had dedicated 60 years of his life to studying the mustangs of the region, became a frequent visitor to the cabin. His calloused hands trembled with emotion every time he watched Spirit voluntarily approach a human dwelling. "Girl," he would say to Maria in his voice hoarse with age, "in all my decades studying these animals, I've never seen anything remotely like it. This horse is rewriting everything we know about wild equine behavior." His notes filled entire notebooks, trying to decipher the mystery unfolding before his experienced eyes. Spring arrived like an explosion of life after the brutal winter. The slopes were covered in wildflowers, and the thaw transformed the streams into singing torrents. The twins, now 3 months old, were developing with surprising vigor. Sul was more active, always waving his chubby fists as if wanting to grab the whole world. Lua was more contemplative, her blue eyes like the winter sky following every movement around her with disconcerting intensity. Maria had transformed the small cabin into a cozy home, every corner prepared with love for the children who, though not biologically hers, already occupied every fiber of her heart. It was on a sunny April afternoon that the first major obstacle arose. Sarah Jones appeared with a bulky folder and an expression Maria had learned to dread. Social services had concluded the initial assessment, and the decision was to transfer the twins to a specialized institution in the capital city. "It's standard procedure," Sarah explained, genuinely pained. "Abandonment cases with these characteristics require specialized care that a small town like Aspen Creek cannot offer." Maria's world seemed to crumble at that moment. The light that had returned to her life threatened to extinguish again. The bureaucratic battle that followed tested every fiber of Maria's determination. Forms, interviews, psychological evaluations, background checks. Each requirement was a new mountain to climb. The system questioned her emotional stability after the trauma of the accident, her financial capacity, even the suitability of raising children in such an isolated environment. But Maria had something the forms couldn't measure: an entire community mobilizing in her support. Petitions circulated through the town, testimonies were written, funds were raised. Aspen Creek had adopted not only Maria, but the extraordinary story that united woman, children, and horse. During this turbulent period, something even more extraordinary began to happen. Spirit no longer came alone. Other members of his band began to appear near the cabin, always keeping a respectful distance, but clearly following the leadership of their alpha stallion. It was a spectacle that attracted increasing attention. Amateur photographers appeared in growing numbers, disturbing the peace Maria fought to maintain. The faith that sustained her days was tested with every camera flash, every stranger who invaded that improvised sanctuary. It was then that Dr. Emily Davis entered the scene. A renowned animal behavior researcher from the University of Berkeley, she had driven 6 hours upon hearing the story. Unlike the curious and opportunistic, Emily came with scientific purpose and, more importantly, with respect. Her presence brought academic legitimacy to the phenomenon, but it also attracted even more attention. "What we are witnessing here," she declared in an impromptu interview, "could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies communication and emotional bonds between mammals of different species." Emily's research revealed fascinating patterns. The baby's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of Spirit's hooves as he approached. Brain waves during sleep showed unusual activity in the moments the horse neighed in the distance. It was as if a secret language was being shared, a communication that transcended words or gestures. Each discovery strengthened Maria's argument to keep the children, but it also increased the media circus around them. Summer brought scorching heat and new revelations. During one of the many reorganizations of the cabin, Maria discovered something. Sewn into the lining of one of the original blankets, a small silver medal with inscriptions in a native language. The object, worn by time but clearly precious, suggested that the baby's abandonment might have been an act of desperation, not neglect. This discovery redirected the police investigation, which until then had reached dead ends. The hope of finding answers, and perhaps even the biological mother, reignited like a stubborn flame. Alongside the official investigations, a new character entered Maria's life. Thomas Brown, a 38-year-old nature photographer, had come to Aspen Creek to document the wild mustangs, but found much more than he expected. Tall and quiet, with gentle hands and eyes that saw beauty in everything, Thomas started as just another professional doing his job. But there was something different about his approach. He would wait hours for the perfect light, respected distances, asked permission before each shot. His patience and respect first won Maria's trust, then something deeper. The first significant moment between them happened on a stormy June afternoon. Thomas had spent the day photographing the dramatic landscape when the rain caught him by surprise. Maria invited him to take shelter in the cabin, and as the storm raged outside, they shared hot tea and stories. He spoke of his nomadic life, always chasing the next perfect photo but never finding a place to call home. She shared her pain, the emptiness the twins had filled, the fear of losing them. It was a conversation that lasted until dawn, building an invisible bridge between two lonely souls. The second major twist came through Marcus Wilson, an ecotourism businessman who saw a golden opportunity in the story. His proposal was seductive in its malignant simplicity: create a sanctuary for spirit where tourists would pay dearly to witness the miracle horse. The figures he quoted were tempting for a community struggling economically. The debate split Aspen Creek down the middle. On one side, those who saw the chance for prosperity. On the other, those who understood that imprisoning spirit would be betraying everything he represented. Tension in the town grew like a pressure cooker situation. Heated city council meetings stretched late into the night. Families were divided on the issue. Maria found herself at the center of a hurricane that threatened to destroy everything she had built. It was Thomas who suggested an alternative solution: use his photographs to create a book and documentary about the story, with profits going towards the creation of a true protected reserve. It was a proposal that respected both spirit's freedom and the community's economic needs. Summer also brought progress in the investigation into the medal. Joseph White Crow, a respected local tribal elder, immediately recognized the object. With a voice choked with emotion, he revealed that it belonged to his granddaughter, Anna, who had left to study nursing in the city 2 years prior. Communications had ceased abruptly 9 months ago, coinciding with the likely conception of the twins. The revelation transformed abandonment into tragedy, neglect into desperate sacrifice. The search for Anna intensified, now with the urgency of a family wanting answers. It was on a particularly hot July afternoon that the romance between Maria and Thomas took another significant step. He had spent weeks photographing the twins in their everyday moments, capturing the ordinary magic of their smiles and discoveries. That day, he presented Maria with an album containing the best images, but they weren't just photos. Each came with small poems he had written, sensitive observations about the love he witnessed daily. Maria cried as she flipped through the pages, seeing her small family through his eyes. It was a mirror that reflected not just images, but the beauty she sometimes forgot to see in the everyday. August brought the first major crisis. The twins, now 7 months old, developed a high fever that wouldn't break. The small local health clinic didn't have the resources to handle the situation, and transferring them to the large city hospital would mean separating them from Maria, possibly permanently. Despair washed over her like a dark wave. It was then that something extraordinary happened again. Spirit appeared closer than ever, practically at the cabin door. His neigh, different from the others, seemed urgent. He began to walk slowly towards the forest, stopping and looking back as if asking to be followed. Against all logic, but trusting the instinct that had guided her thus far, Maria followed the horse, carrying the feverish babies. Thomas accompanied her, just as perplexed. Spirit led them along a trail neither of them knew, to a clearing where a sacred spring of crystal-clear water bubbled among moss-covered stones. Elder Joseph, consulted later, would explain that this was a sacred spring, known for its healing properties but whose exact location had been lost for generations. The cool water helped lower the twins' fever, and the herbs growing around it, later identified as medicinal herbs, completed the natural treatment. This event deepened the mystery, and the connection even further. How did Spirit know about the spring? How did he know the children needed it? The questions multiplied, but the answers remained elusive as the morning mist in the mountains. Emily Davis spent weeks studying the site, collecting samples, trying to find scientific explanations. But even she had to admit that some things transcended academic understanding. The light of comprehension did not always come through microscopes and charts. The relationship between Maria and Thomas evolved naturally, like the seasons. The moment of mutual vulnerability came on a clear August night, when he finally shared the weight he carried. His younger sister had drowned when he was 12, while she was under his care. The guilt had haunted him for decades, turning him into an eternal traveler, always fleeing the pain of forming bonds he might lose. Maria listened in silence, holding his hand as the words flowed like blood from an old wound. When he finished, she simply said, "The pain doesn't lessen when we carry it alone. It just gets heavier." September arrived with its golden colors and the promise of change. The twins were crawling vigorously, exploring every corner of their small world. Sewell showed a natural affinity for animals, laughing whenever he saw Spirit in the distance. Lua, in turn, demonstrated unusual perception, always knowing when the horse would approach, pointing towards the forest minutes before he appeared. The bond between them had strengthened in ways that continued to defy explanation. The hope of better days shone like the autumn sun, but shadows also lengthened. The city council finally reached a decision on Wilson's proposal. A community vote would be held, leaving the fate of Spirit in the hands of the people. The campaign was intense on both sides. Wilson brought in economists and tourism experts. Maria and her supporters organized vigils and talks on conservation and respect for nature. Thomas used his photographs to show the beauty of freedom. The children from the local school made drawings and poems about the savior horse. The community's faith in making the right choice was tested daily by promises of prosperity versus deeper values. It was during this turbulent period that another piece of the puzzle emerged. A long-distance truck driver approached the authorities with information about a young Native American woman he had given a ride to on a stormy night 9 months ago. She was in labor, desperate to get somewhere safe. He had dropped her off near the reserve entrance when she insisted, despite his protests. The description matched Anna. The pieces began to fit into a narrative of courage and tragedy, not abandonment and irresponsibility. The climax of this phase came with the great October storm. Meteorologists had predicted rain, but no one expected the deluge that hit Aspen Creek. Within hours, the calm streams turned into raging torrents. The main bridge was swept away, isolating the lower part of town where Maria's cabin was located. The water rose inexorably, and with the twins now 9 months old, evacuation on foot was impossible. Panic seized Maria when she realized they were trapped. It was Thomas who first saw Spirit on the porch, completely soaked but as imposing as ever. The horse pawed the ground with urgency, neighing in a way they had never heard before. His eyes, usually calm, showed an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Maria understood. In a decision that defied all maternal logic, but trusting the bond she had witnessed for months, she began to improvise a way to transport the babies on the horse's back. Using ropes and blankets, with Thomas's help, she created a kind of double basket that could be balanced on Spirit's back. The horse remained perfectly still throughout the process, as if he understood that any sudden movement could be fatal. When the twins were carefully placed, something extraordinary happened. Other horses from the band emerged from the flooded forest, forming a protective formation around Spirit. The journey that followed would go down in the annals of Aspen Creek as one of the most extraordinary events ever witnessed. Spirit led the way through the rising water. his sure steps finding firm ground where there seemed to be only current. The other Mustangs maintained formation, creating barriers against the floating debris. Maria, holding tightly to Spirit's mane and Thomas close behind, crossed passages that under normal circumstances would be impassable. It was as if the horses knew every submerged stone, every safe path through the chaos. The most critical moment came at the crossing of the flooded gorge. The water roared through the narrow passage with devastating force, but Spirit stopped, waiting. The other horses positioned themselves strategically, and then, as if obeying an invisible signal, began to cross in a calculated formation, breaking the force of the current. Spirit followed in the center of this living formation, protected by the bodies of his band. The babies miraculously remained calm throughout the ordeal, as if they knew they were safe. When they finally reached higher, safe ground, the relief was palpable. Maria fell to her knees, tears mixing with the rain as she checked the twins. They were wet but unharmed, looking around with curiosity as if they had just woken from a nap. Thomas hugged her, and for a moment the world shrank to that circle of gratitude and love. Spirit and his band remained nearby until they were sure the danger had passed, then disappeared into the forest as they always did, leaving only the memory of the impossible they had made possible. The rescue during the flood became national news. Television crews invaded Aspen Creek as soon as the waters receded. The story of the horse that had saved the twins twice captured the country's imagination. But with fame came complications. Proposals of all kinds poured in. Reality shows, book deals, adoption offers from wealthy families who wanted the miracle children. Maria found herself at the center of a media circus that threatened to destroy the peace she had fought so hard to build. It was Joseph Whitecrow's intervention that brought a new turn to events. In an emotional press conference, he revealed that his personal investigation, combined with the truck driver's clues, had led to a devastating discovery. Anna had given birth alone during the January storm, in a makeshift shelter near the reserve. Complications during labor, without medical help, had sealed her fate. But in her final moments, with superhuman strength, she had carried the babies to the place where she knew they would be found, a clearing frequented by the wild Mustangs, where her grandfather had taken her as a child to watch the horses. The revelation completely transformed the narrative. Regina had not abandoned her children. She had made the ultimate sacrifice to save them. The medal was not just a precious object, but a link to her roots, a silent message about the children's identity. The local Native American community embraced the twins as their own, but also recognized in Maria the mother destiny had chosen. A ceremony was organized to honor Anna and formalize the connection between everyone involved in this web of love and sacrifice. The formal adoption process, which had dragged on for months, gained new momentum. With the support of the biological family and the public outcry, the bureaucratic obstacles began to fall. Sarah Jones, the social worker who had initially recommended the twins' transfer, became one of Maria's strongest advocates. "I have witnessed many foster care placements," she stated in her final report, "but I have never seen a bond as deep and transformative as this one." Thomas, who had documented every moment of this extraordinary journey, made a decision that surprised everyone but Maria. He announced he was ending his career as an itinerant photographer. Aspen Creek, he said, had taught him that some images are too precious to be captured on film. They need to be lived. His declaration was accompanied by a gesture that melted Maria's heart. He had bought the small property next to the cabin, planning to build a studio and a life alongside the family he had chosen as his own. The moment of their love's consolidation came on a clear November night, under a starry sky that seemed to celebrate with them. Thomas had prepared a simple dinner on the porch, with the twins sleeping peacefully in their cribs. Among flickering candles and the distant sound of wild horses, he offered Maria not a ring, but a necklace with two pendants. Small silver stars, one for Sewell and one for Lua. "I want to be part of this constellation," he said simply. Maria's answer came in the form of a kiss that sealed not just a romance, but the formation of a family chosen by destiny. The community vote on Spirit's fate took place on a cold December morning. Participation was massive, with residents who hadn't voted in years showing up to make their voices heard. The result was overwhelming. Aspen Creek chose freedom over easy profit. But the victory was accompanied by a creative solution. Inspired by Thomas's suggestion, the Spirit-Free Reserve was created, a protected area that would ensure the preservation of the Mustang's habitat while allowing controlled and educational ecotourism. Profits would go towards conservation and an educational fund for the region's children, including Sol and Lua. The twins' first birthday arrived with the snow, closing the circle of their extraordinary journey. The celebration was a blend of traditions, honoring both the children's Native American heritage and the multicultural family they had formed. The Aspen Creek Community Hall overflowed with residents, researchers, officials who had followed the case, and even reporters who had become friends over the months. But the most magical moment was reserved for the end of the party. As the sun set, painting the snow in shades of pink, Maria took the twins outside. As if arranged, Spirit emerged from the tree line, closer than he had ever voluntarily been. Sol and Lua, now able to stand with support, stretched out their little hands towards the horse. What happened next made everyone present hold their breath. Spirit approached slowly, lowering his large head to the children's level. With infinite gentleness, he allowed the tiny hands to touch his mane for the first time. The touch lasted only seconds, but its meaning would reverberate forever. It was a seal of approval, a recognition that the circle of protection and love was complete. The children laughed, a crystal-clear sound that echoed through the clearing. Spirit neighed softly in response, a sound that everyone present later described as joyful. Then, with the dignity that had always characterized him, the horse moved away, stopping one last time to look back before disappearing into the forest that was his true home. Emily Davis would later publish a groundbreaking article about what she had witnessed in Aspen Creek, but her final words in the academic paper were surprisingly poetic. Science can measure heartbeats and brain waves, but it cannot quantify the love that transcends species. In Aspen Creek, I witnessed that life's greatest mysteries do not need to be solved, only honored. Life in Aspen Creek returned to a new normal. Maria formalized the twins' adoption in an emotional ceremony where Joseph White Crow blessed them with tribal names that honored both their heritage and their journey. Morning Star for Sol and Guardian, of the Moon for Lua. Thomas became not just a stepfather, but a father in every way that mattered. His photo exhibition, Spirit's Children, traveled the country, with all profits going to the reserve and conservation causes. Spirit continued to appear regularly, always maintaining the respectful distance of a guardian who had fulfilled his mission, but remained vigilant. Other Mustangs sometimes accompanied him, and it was not uncommon to see the town's children stop their play to watch the majestic passage of the band. The black horse with the white star had become more than a local legend. He was a living reminder that miracles happen when love overcomes the impossible. The children grew up surrounded by this extraordinary story, but also by the normalcy of everyday love. Their first words included Mama for Maria, Papa for Thomas, and Pito, their attempt to pronounce Spirit. They learned to walk on the same ground where they had been saved, to speak in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and the native language of their ancestors. Each developmental milestone was celebrated not only by the immediate family, but by an entire community that had come together to protect and nurture these small lives. Maria's old wound, the one the impossibility of bearing children had opened, did not disappear. It transformed. Where there had once been emptiness now overflowed with purpose. The twins had not been born from her womb, but they had been reborn in her heart on that icy morning when she found them nestled against the flank of a wild horse. Thomas, with his photographer's patience and poet's heart, had found in Aspen Creek not just a story to document, but a life to live. On quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the pine trees, Maria sometimes thought of Anna, the young mother, who had given everything for her children to live. She would tell the twins about their biological mother, when the time was right, about the courage that runs in their veins, about the sacrifice that made their existence possible. But she would also tell them about Spirit, the unlikely guardian angel who defied his own nature to preserve two precious lives. The reserve prospered, becoming a model of conscious conservation. Students came from distant universities to study not only the unique behavior of the Mustangs, but also the possible harmony between progress and preservation. Wilson, the businessman who had tried to capitalize on Spirit, surprised everyone by becoming one of the reserve's largest donors, touched by the community's determination to protect what was sacred. Time passed like crystal-clear water over ancient stones, polishing edges and revealing hidden beauties. The twins grew strong and healthy, carrying within them the resilience of all who had fought for their lives. Sol developed a natural affinity for animals, often found talking to birds and squirrels as if he could understand their responses. Lua showed a sharp intuition, always knowing when someone needed comfort, offering hugs that healed invisible pains. The connection with Spirit remained, evolving but never diminishing. As the children grew, the horse maintained his distant vigil, appearing at significant moments as if he knew when his presence was needed. On their first day of local school, he was seen on the hill watching the school bus depart. When Sol broke his arm falling from a tree, Spirit spent the entire night, visible from the bedroom window as if standing guard. When Lua had nightmares about the story of her origin, she woke to find the horse closer than ever, his gentle neigh floating through the open window like an ancestral lullaby. Maria documented everything in journals that would one day become the official history of those extraordinary days. But words, however carefully chosen, would never fully capture the magic of the everyday. Thomas teaching Sol to photograph butterflies, Lua helping Maria in the medicinal herb garden they had started after the discovery of the spring. The family nights under the stars listening to Joseph's stories about the ancestors and the protective spirits of the mountain. The deepest lesson Aspen Creek learned was not about wild horses or miracle children. It was about love's capacity to transcend barriers between species, between cultures, between wounded hearts and reborn hopes. Every resident carried a piece of this story, a reminder that they had witnessed and participated in something greater than the sum of its individual parts. And so, in that community nestled between ancient mountains and whispering forests, life continued its course with the comforting certainty that miracles are not unique and spectacular events, but daily choices of love, protection, and faith. Spirit, the majestic black guardian, remained free in his mountains but forever intertwined in the destiny of those he saved. The twins grew up knowing they were chosen not once, but multiple times, by the mother who gave her life for them, by the horse who protected them, by the woman who welcomed them, by the man who completed their family, and by an entire community that chose love over profit. In the words of Joseph White Crow, spoken at the birthday ceremony, some stories are told to entertain, others to teach, but some rare stories exist to remind us of who we truly are, beings capable of transcending our limitations when love calls us. The story of Sol, Lua, and Spirit was all these things and more, a living testament that in the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, light finds a way to shine through the cracks of the impossible. And you, who have heard this story of love and miracle, at what moment will you allow hope to bloom in your own desert?